Hello, my name's Rod Peppiatt and I'm Minister of the Word in the Avenue Uniting Church in Blackburn, Victoria. We meet on the lands of the Wurundjeri peoples. Our reflection today draws us to the end of the season that's known as Epiphany, the revelations, the signs of the presence of God in the world in Jesus. And we begin shortly the season of Lent, which leads us to Easter. One of the traditional gospel readings for this Sunday is the story that we call the Transfiguration, a story rich in symbolism and its own life, and a deep story of mystery. And the version that we're going to read today is found in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 17. Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John, and he led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. And suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it's good for us to be here with you. If you wish, I'll make 3 dwellings here. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the Beloved, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about this vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." It's a big story, isn't it? It's a significant part of Matthew's Gospel for the way in which Matthew is unfolding his story of Jesus. That's what the Gospels are, word pictures of Jesus, drawn from the stories of those who knew him and those who followed his way. And it's an important story for our picture of Jesus as well. It shapes not only how we understand him, but how we follow his way. Now, in one sense, it's a shame that the liturgical year pulls us out of the flow of Matthew's Gospel. We've jumped from Matthew 5 to Matthew 17. And perhaps we miss some of the importance of what's in between. We will pick some of it up as we head closer to Easter. But at the same time, this is the traditional closing story to the Epiphany season, as I mentioned, and as the lead-in to the season of Lent. And it has its place in the big picture, the flow of the narrative within Matthew's Gospel. The flow of the particular story is important too. Jesus, says Matthew, withdraws to the mountain with Peter, James and John. I wonder what they were thinking as they climbed the mountain, and what the rest of the group left behind were thinking, for that matter. But as they get there, they are witnesses, Matthew tells us, to this incredible spectacle that's not easy to say fast. The shining clothes, the dazzling appearance, the voice from the cloud. Clearly Matthew is making a point here. He's making a point about Jesus' heavenly connections. And no wonder Peter didn't know what to say. Here for him is his friend Jesus, his teacher and his leader, suddenly placed in the company of the greats, Moses and Elijah, the greats of the Jewish story. Now, it's not important to Matthew how we know that it's Moses and Elijah. They'd been dead for a long time by this. That's not the point. That's not the point in the imagery and the symbolism and the metaphor of this story. The point for Matthew is that Jesus sits firmly in the traditions of his people and within the traditions of God's Spirit, working through particular leaders at particular times. He was a Jew, says Matthew, and he was a leader of the Jews. And that's affirmed by the story of the voice from the cloud, which draws us back to a similar voice in Jesus' baptism. So it's a rich story, a powerful story. Mountaintop experiences are precious, and they should be. We should hold them dear when they come our way and remember them well. They're precious in their own right, and they can be our encouragement and our inspiration too when the story shifts. Peter, James and John looked around. Moses and Elijah were no longer there, just Jesus. What's Matthew's point? I think it's this. Moses and Elijah had been very important and very faithful leaders for their times, for their moments in history, and it's important for Matthew to identify Jesus with them. But it's equally important for Matthew's story of Jesus that Moses and Elijah leave the story. This is Jesus' moment. The story has to move on. Jesus' time is different, and so will be his mission and purpose. And so we see him leave the mountain. His work is not there. It is among the people, as it was indeed for Moses and Elijah. Jesus' work is not simply to be transfigured or glorified. In fact, by then, he's pretty sure his work could end up getting him killed. And as we know, he was right. This story reminds us that the call of God's Spirit moves on. It remains connected with what's gone before, for certain, but not limited by it. Builds on it, shaping new futures. In each age and in each moment, the calling for people of faith has been and is to discern the leading of God's Spirit, to risk that leading us on our way. It starts with God, however we understand God, and it shapes who we are and what we do as church, as people of faith, around our calling to reflect the life of God in the world. So friends, this is an important story. It calls us to the mountain to be refreshed and renewed for the ministry we share in the world. And when you think about it, that's the point of what we do too when we come together as church. To do church, to be church. We're gathered in to be strengthened and sent out for where our work is the other 6 days. Despite Peter's best intentions, we can't stay on the mountain. But those moments remain precious. Each time we leave the mountaintop and live our lives as faithfully as we can, let's remember also the other big truth of this story. It turns out that we never leave God behind. In the holy name of the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen.